Ryu, the iconic face of Street Fighter and one of the most recognisable characters in gaming history. This distinguished combatant has had a fighting career spanning over 37 years, but with such a lengthy tenure, is this legendary athlete now past his prime? Well, no matter what you believe the answer to this question to be, one thing is for sure, he has had a hell of a run that is certainly worth celebrating. So with that said, join me today as we commemorate his illustrious legacy, look at his lore, and discuss everything there is to know about this famous fighter. That way we can finally answer the question, has Ryu finished his story? Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Ryu, this is your life. When it comes to Street Fighter's unforgettable impact, the release of Street Fighter 2 was of course a hallmark moment for the franchise that would lead to the Hadouken throwing Ryu becoming a household name forever. However, his humble debut obviously occurred 4 years earlier in the lesser played original Street Fighter game. To begin Ryu's tale and reminiscing about his maiden appearance, we must first turn our attention to the man who created the first Street Fighter, Takeshi Nishiyama. What's amusing is that while birthing one of the most recognisable video game franchises of all time, the truth is that Nishiyama set out to become a newspaper journalist. But in his quest to embark on such a career, he would take a part-time job at IREM to ensure that he still had a bit of cash coming in. Taking inspiration from Hong Kong martial arts films he enjoyed, and the fact that he practiced martial arts himself, here he would design Kung Fu Master, which would lead to him being headhunted by Capcom to produce a game for them. After landing this new job role, Nishiyama wanted to create something that added more depth and story, something with memorable character designs that felt closer to a movie than his previous works. On this basis, in an interview with OneUp.com, Nishiyama adds, "We even conceptualized the details for the characters that we didn't put in the game itself. What the characters might like to eat, do they have sisters, other family members, etc. Street Fighter was different from prior games in the amount of depth we gave the characters." So next time someone tells you that Street Fighter isn't about character lore and simply about fighting mechanics, here is proof from the source that such a statement couldn't be further from the truth. Street Fighter has always been amazing and I bloody love this franchise. But do you know what's even better? The fact that I can get you huge discounts on most entries in the series. Get up to 90% off thousands of AAA, retro and indie games, with each bargain you grab saving you money and simultaneously supporting the production of crazy long fighting game videos like this one. In fact, many of you have demonstrated you love these deals so much that Instant Gaming have decided to sponsor this channel for a record 5th month in a row. So to both them and you, I can't thank you enough. Long live long form videos and long live dirt cheap video games. Yeah! Use my affiliate links via the pinned comments to grab some bargains now. While later games in the series would feature expansive rosters of playable characters, this first game only featured 2, with all the other fighters in the game being restricted to functioning as non-playable NPC opponents. As for the 2 athletes we could play as, they were essentially Player 1 and Player 2, red and white wearing palette swaps of one another. The colour of the character's gis are the same as those featured in Karate Champ that came before it, a game that is often credited for popularising the one-on-one fighting game genre back in 1984. Considering that Street Fighter with its humble beginnings was a game about a martial arts tournament, it makes sense that the Player 1 controlled Ryu featured a simplistic everyman design. However, to be fair, his most iconic move, which would be established in this title, would be far from ordinary. According to Nishiyama, the famous Hadouken was his idea. He states that it was inspired from anime and manga that was around at the time, with him using Space Battleship Yamato as an example. In that, the battleship has a laser missile called Hadouho. It collects energy and then blasts it into space, destroying the enemy. That's where I got the idea for the Hadouken. The Shoryuken and Tatsumaki Senpuyayuku were original ideas. I took martial arts moves and exaggerated them so they looked like special attacks. While Space Battleship Yamato is the example given, it's impossible to deny though that the move was likely also inspired by Goku's Kamehameha wave used in Dragon Ball. a technique that predates the Hadouken by 3 years. When we account for the fact that the attacks have identical movement and the series fighting tournament setting, maybe Nishiyama felt these ki blasts were too similar to reference Dragon Ball directly. However, perhaps this is all just a coincidence. I'll leave that one for you to discuss in the comment section. As for the story of the 1987 game, Ryu competes alongside his best friend and sparring partner Ken, taking part in the first ever World Warrior tournament, whereby a matchup with the Emperor of Muay Thai, Sagat, awaits. Over the years, the lore surrounding the events that took place in this game have been more and more fleshed out. In this tournament, Ryu's journey takes him to various locations around the world, including Japan, China, the United States and Thailand. At each location, he faces off against local champions, demonstrating his growing prowess and determination to be the best. At the climax of Ryu's first adventure, he finally faces off against the final boss, Sagat, the Emperor of Muay Thai himself. In the decisive moment of their battle, Ryu executes a powerful Dragon Punch, which not only defeats Sagat, but also leaves a permanent scar across his chest. This victory is significant, marking Ryu's emergence as a world-class fighter and setting the stage for future rivalries. Ryu's journey continues in subsequent games, where he encounters new challenges and adversaries while maintaining his focus on becoming a true martial artist, with him returning to action in the beloved Street Fighter II, the 1991 title that would make him a household name. After his victory over Sagat in the first Street Fighter tournament, Ryu is constantly seeking stronger opponents to challenge and improve himself. In Street Fighter II, Ryu participates in the second World Warrior tournament, organised by the criminal mastermind M. Bison, the leader of the evil organisation Shadaloo. The tournament draws fighters from around the world, each with their own motives for entering. Ryu enters the tournament with a single goal: to test his skills against the best fighters in the world and continue his path towards becoming a true martial artist. Unlike some fighters who enter for personal reasons or revenge, Ryu is driven by the pursuit of strength and self-improvement. His fighting stance would be updated for this game, designed by Akira Nishitani and Akira Yasuda. His new stance was inspired by that of Bruce Lee from the movie Enter the Dragon. Yasuda implemented this change as he wanted Ryu to have a stance that wasn't traditional karate. Manabu Takemura, who was a Japanese to English translator employed by Capcom from the late 80s, didn't like Ryu's thin physique he had in the first game, so suggested they make him a lot more muscular. Yasuda would also shorten the character's hair, as he believed it made the sprite look cooler. Throughout the tournament, Ryu battles against several iconic characters, including Ken Masters, Ryu's best friend and rival, who shares a similar training background, Chun-Li, an Interpol agent seeking to bring down Shadaloo and avenge her father's death, Guile, a US Air Force officer looking to avenge his best friend Charlie, who was killed by M. Bison, and more. One of the pivotal moments in Ryu's journey is his rematch with Sagat. After being scarred by Ryu's Shoryuken in the first tournament, Sagat seeks revenge and redemption, but the climax of the tournament involves a confrontation with M. Bison, the final boss and the tournament's organiser. M. Bison's ultimate fate varies depending on who you play as in the game, but he remains a recurring antagonist across the series. In Ryu's ending, after defeating Bison and emerging victorious in the tournament, Ryu is shown to be uninterested in the fame, glory and prizes associated with his victory. Instead, he quietly leaves the arena seeking his next challenge. After multiple different iterations of Street Fighter II were released, 1994 would end up being an incredibly eventful year for the franchise. So much content was created, including another edition of the game, an animated movie, and even the infamous live-action movie. In the video game world, Akuma would be added to Street Fighter II, the new secret end boss who would soon play a huge role in Ryu's story, and in the Street Fighter II animated movie, Ryu would function as its main protagonist. In this film universe, Ryu trained with his best friend Ken as a teenager, rescuing him from a fall. After their training, Ryu bid farewell to Ken to pursue martial arts mastery. Years later, shown as a flashback scene, the events of Street Fighter I are shown. Ryu battles Sagat on a stormy night with a Shadaloo drone watching. Sagat begins to overpower Ryu, but Ryu unleashes a powerful Shoryuken, leaving Sagat scarred and then defeating him with a Hadouken. In Hong Kong, Ryu joined a tournament and defeated his opponent, impressing spectator Fei Long. Fei Long informed Ryu about Shadaloo and Sagat's involvement with them. After multiple other events, a showdown with M. Bison is imminent, but as the story progresses, Ken is kidnapped by the dictator. Bison brainwashes Ken, who attacks Ryu, but Ryu refuses to fight back. prompting Ken to resist Bison's control. Bison tosses Ken off of a mountain, impeding Ryu's rescue attempt and trying to recruit him to Shadaloo. Ryu resisted, and with Ken's reappearance, they defeated Bison with a combined Hadouken, reducing him to a sphere of psycho power which was destroyed by his jet. Later, Ryu says goodbye to Ken again, but Bison reappears, attempting to run Ryu down with a truck. The story ends with Ryu charging towards Bison. While our hero would be a huge part of this movie, shockingly when it came to the live-action Hollywood movie, Ryu would be reduced to a supporting role with Guile instead being positioned as the main character. This appears to be for a number of reasons, including Capcom striking a toy deal with Hasbro for them to produce Street Fighter G.I. Joe action figures. Secondly, the Caucasian Jean-Claude Van Damme had been picked to star in the movie, and thirdly, I guess they short-sightedly believed that the blonde American military-themed character would get over stronger with the public than the more generic Japanese martial artist. History now tells us, though, that the American public preferred Ryu. Diverging drastically from the source material, in live action Ryu and Ken are portrayed as American con artists who scam wealthy crime lords. They become involved in the fight to liberate Shadaloo. Ryu's portrayal in the film is highly inaccurate compared to the games, comics and anime. He lacks his iconic abilities and prepares for battle by removing his jacket or shirt like Bruce Lee, and his Hadouken is briefly shown as a screen flash during a fight with Vega, who is depicted as his rival instead of Sagat. Despite being a con artist, Ryu retains a sense of honour. This is evident during a disagreement with Ken at Shadaloo's fortress. Ryu chooses to stay and help rescue hostages, while Ken initially wants to leave. Eventually, Ken returns to help Ryu when he is ambushed by Vega and Sagat. In the end, Ryu and Ken assist in freeing the hostages and escape the fortress. They offer to help Guile restore the country. Throughout the film, most of the characters pronounce his name as Ryu instead of Ryu. Being an old school fan rather than a jolly come lately like half the audience watching this video, this was traditionally the pronunciation I always went with. This made sense as this is how it was said in Capcom's official movie about the game. In fact, the only reason I stopped was because I got constant torrents of abuse from toxic virgin weebs who would constantly harass me for not pronouncing the name the same as them losers. At the end of the day, you can only inform them about the greatness of a Street Fighter movie from before they were born a certain amount of times before the same conversation gets very boring. So, he is Ryu in my speech at present, but in my heart, as a Street Fighter 2 generation fan of the franchise, he will always be Ryu. Even though in actual Japanese, neither of these pronunciations are close to right, and it's closer to Ryo. Would you prefer I just said it like that all the time, Japanophiles? Let me know in the comments. 1995 would be another crazy year for our favourite white gi wearing karate bum, including him being playable in both of the questionable Mortal Kombat looking video games based on the live action movie. That year, the con man depiction of the character continued to exist, but on the small screen in the Street Fighter cartoon. In this western produced media, Ryu does have a rivalry with Sagat though, an element of his character that was overlooked in live action. Japan would produce their own animated Street Fighter show too, known as Street Fighter 2 V. As this one was made for Japan rather than America, Ryu was put back in a starring role. In this adaptation, Ryu is depicted as a tanned 17-year-old with spiky hair. Travelling with Ken, Ryu has not yet mastered the Hadouken and instead uses a basic form of ki manipulation. After losing a bar fight to Guile, Ryu and Ken decide to journey the world, teaming up with Chun-Li. In the anime's climax, Ryu defeats Bison, learning his iconic maneuver before finishing him off with the Hadouken. As cool as all of this was though, the most significant release of the year would be the first title released in the Street Fighter Alpha series, a trilogy of games set in between the events of the 1987 title and the coveted Street Fighter 2. In this one, Ryu's story would be fleshed out much further. After triumphing over Sagat, Ryu embarks on an exhilarating journey of self-discovery, grappling with life's profound questions. Though he has bested the world's mightiest fighter, Ryu refuses to believe he has achieved his ultimate goal. His relentless training leads him to master new techniques, constantly pushing his limits. On a remote island, Ryu confronts Akuma and emerges victorious. However, Akuma reveals that the battle was a mere test, recognizing the same dark power within Ryu, the Satsui no Hado. This sinister force, Akuma explains, drives fighters to seek victory at any cost, even to the point of killing their opponent. Demonstrating his terrifying strength, Akuma obliterates the island with a single punch, leaving Ryu stranded. Escaping the island, Ryu is discovered by Ken. Troubled by his recent ordeal, Ryu questions Ken about the true essence of being a fighter. Ken, sensing Ryu's inner turmoil, challenges him to a sparring match to clear his mind. After defeating Ryu, Ken realises his friend is haunted by his victory over Sagat. He urges Ryu to continue fighting to find his answers and gives him his red headband as a symbol of their bond and a reminder to stay true to himself. Ryu accepts the headband with gratitude and they part ways. Shortly after, Ryu meets Sakura, an enthusiastic fan who wishes to train under him. Acknowledging that he still has much to learn, Ryu encourages her to keep training and takes a photo with her, inspiring her to pursue her dreams. Later in the trilogy, Ryu encounters Sagat once more. Sagat demands a rematch, and despite Ryu's concerns about his condition, they fight. Ryu intentionally holds back, allowing Sagat to win to prevent further injury. Realising this, Sagat vows to fight Ryu again, determined to face him at full strength. Ryu remains troubled by Akuma's ominous words, and an encounter with Rose, who warns him that defeating Bison could cost him his soul. When Ryu finally confronts Bison, he is overpowered and brainwashed, learning that the Satsui no Hado is akin to Bison's psycho power. In a climactic showdown, Ken, Sakura and Sagat intervene. While Ken and Sakura distract Bison, Sagat battles the brainwashed Ryu. Sagat's relentless encouragement helps Ryu break free from Bison's control, and together they manage to temporarily defeat the tyrant. Through these trials, Ryu's journey is marked by fierce battles, profound friendships, and an unyielding quest to master both his inner darkness and the true essence of martial arts. Now, what's really interesting about this part of the story is that it opens up two divergent timelines. One that leads to the events of Street Fighter II, another which sees him turn to the dark side and become the demonic entity known as Evil Ryu, whose tale we shall explore more in depth later in the video. Throughout 1996, 1997 and 1998, Ryu's impact in the world of fighting games would only grow from here. These years would include the release of the rest of the Alpha Trilogy, which we just covered the events of, and the Marvel vs Capcom series would be born. The incredible tag team crossover fighters that mix Marvel and Capcom characters together into single titles. The first of these would of course be X-Men vs Street Fighter, a game which, as I've mentioned many times, blew my mind upon launch. Featuring the iconic image of Ryu shaking hands with Cyclops, and the inclusion of huge, ridiculous Mega Hadoukens. By this point in his career, Ryu seemed more like a superhero to me than ever before. In this era, Ryu would also be chipified and be made playable in Pocket Fighter, as well as appearing in this form in the addictive puzzle game that is comically known as Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo. In 1996, the trilogy of Street Fighter EX games would start being produced, a series of polygonal fighters delivered collaboratively with a Rika that are considered non-canon to the other games. Ryu, of course, would be a permanent fixture in these too. As for the Alpha series, which we touched on earlier, it was brought to life with engaging animations and an animated movie, showcasing Ryu's pivotal role. In Street Fighter Alpha, the animation, Ryu grapples with the torment of the Dark Hado, and the haunting memory of his master Gouken's death at Akuma's hands. Amidst the bustling city, Ryu encounters with Shadaloo agents, catch the eye of Interpol agent Chun-Li, and the eager young fighter Sakura, who is determined to become his student. One day, Rose appears before Ryu, forewarning him of a grim future and a looming internal struggle, only to vanish as Ken arrives. While Ken fetches water, Ryu experiences excruciating visions of Akuma, unleashing a surge of dark ki that devastates part of the forest. As Ryu confides in Ken about the Dark Hado, its sinister grip tightens once more. Ken's intervention shatters its hold, but a troubled Ryu implores Ken to end his life if the Dark Force consumes him entirely. In Street Fighter Alpha Generation, Ryu journeys to Japan to visit his old dojo and pay homage to his master. That night he is plagued by dreams of Akuma, waking up relieved it was only a nightmare. A monk later tests Ryu's fighting potential, and though Ryu is defeated, the monk, impressed by his spirit, invites him to dinner. Their conversation turns to Akuma, and the monk, sensing Ryu's readiness, reveals Akuma's location. Ryu confronts Akuma, but his skills falter, and he teeters on the brink of succumbing to the Satsui no Hado, even attempting the dreaded Raging Demon attack. A solitary flower stirs memories of his master, prompting Ryu to reject the dark power. Akuma mocks Ryu, claiming his attachment to his master has weakened him. Ryu, however, declares it has made him stronger. Akuma's fierce assault is met with Ryu's purified ki, partially restoring Akuma's humanity. The saga concludes with Ryu continuing his relentless journey around the world, seeking mastery over his inner darkness and striving to become the ultimate warrior. In 1997, we would finally get the next video game chapter in the Street Fighter series, and finally a game that precedes the events that took place in Street Fighter 2. That year we would receive Street Fighter 3, the new generation, which over the next couple of years would be followed up by Second Impact and Third Strike. In New Generation, Ryu, ever dedicated to his path of martial arts mastery, continues his journey seeking worthy opponents and deeper understanding of his fighting style. In this game he encounters new challenges and formidable foes, particularly the enigmatic Gil, leader of the Secret Society. Ryu enters the third World Warrior Tournament. During the tournament he faces Sean, who was sent by Ken to challenge him. Ryu consistently defeats Sean with a single Hadouken, observing and learning from each match. In Street Fighter 3's Second Impact, Ryu's journey intensifies as he delves deeper into his training. This installment sees the return of old rivals and the introduction of new characters like Hugo and Urien. Ryu remains steadfast in his quest, facing his challenge with determination and honour. Ryu encounters and decisively defeats Alex, encouraging him to keep training and seek stronger opponents. Inspired by Ryu's skill, Alex vows to find him for a rematch. Meanwhile, Ryu continues his training, unaware that Oro is secretly observing him. Despite finding Oro eccentric, Ryu respects his martial arts mastery. Oro sees Ryu as a future successor, but thinks it would take 15 years for him to be ready. Intrigued by Ryu's pure heart, Oro believes Ryu can save the world with proper training. However, Ryu shows no interest in becoming Oro's student or learning his techniques. He continues to clash with Ken, whose fiery spirit always pushes Ryu to his limits. Throughout these battles, Ryu strives to surpass his own limitation and achieve a state of purity in his martial arts. By the time Street Fighter 3 Third Strike unfolds, Ryu has grown significantly, both as a fighter and as a person. His rivalry with Ken remains a central pillar of his journey, each bout serving as a testament to their enduring friendship and competitive spirit. In the realm of sprite-based fighters, moving into the new millennium, Ryu of course would be playable in the absolutely amazing yet chaotic Marvel vs Capcom 2, as well as appearing as a roster member in every SNK vs Capcom crossover game that was put out by either brand. The sprite-based Capcom fighting game era closed out with the far from popular Capcom Fighting Evolution, a rushed hodgepodge of a fighter that mixed roster members from different fighting games that tried to salvage some of the concepts designed for the cancelled Capcom Fighting All-Stars game. Things would go fairly quiet on the Capcom fighting game front for quite some time after this. However, the franchise would finally return with Street Fighter 4 in 2008, a title bizarrely set between the events of Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 4. But what was really cool is that this game was in part developed by Dimps, a company owned by the legendary by this point Takeshi Nishiyama. After the second World Warrior tournament, Ryu immersed himself in intense training in an isolated desert, haunted by his clashes with Akuma, who had urged him to embrace the Dark Shadow or face death. Emerging from the desert, Ryu visits a bar where he encounters a biker who spoke of an American martial arts champion who had abandoned his family. Suspecting it was Ken, Ryu went to the champion's house but was ambushed by the cunning Sea Viper. As the battle ensued, Delta Red agent Cammy attempted to intervene but was swiftly overpowered by Viper. The Dark Shadow surged within Ryu, granted him overwhelming strength to defeat Viper, who managed to escape. Consumed by the dark power, Ryu went on a rampage, slaughtering several Sin scientists. Ken, Chun-Li, Guile and Sakura arrived just in time to save him and assist Cammy. Sakura managed to restrain the possessed Ryu while Ken called for medical help. As Ryu gained consciousness, the horrifying extent of his actions dawned on him. Taken to Ken's mansion, Ryu learned he was being targeted by Sin and its leader Seth. Determined to put an end to Seth's plan, Ryu joins Guile's mission to infiltrate Seth's cruise ship, aware that a confrontation awaited him. Upon reaching the base, Ryu and Ken battled countless Sin thugs before Ryu finally faced Seth. The ensuing fight was brutal, with Seth initially overpowering Ryu and preaching his twisted philosophy of power. Ryu, admitting his lack of complete understanding, rejected Seth's vision. As Seth pummeled him, Ryu awakened a new formidable power and nearly defeated Seth before collapsing from the effort. Sensing this newfound strength in Ken, Ryu and Ken parted ways, promising to meet again. Ryu entered the Sin tournament aiming to refine his skills and face Ken in a rematch. He encouraged Sakura to train harder and encountered Sagat, their battle hinting at Ryu's victory. In the tournament's final round, Ryu confronted a clone of Seth at the Sin headquarters. He triumphed, bringing the building down around them. Unleashing the Satsui no Hado on the Beast machine, Ryu destroyed it. As Sakura searched for him, the machine's pulse knocked her into a wall. Ryu protected her with a Shoryuken, and together they escaped the collapsing structure, having vanquished the deadly weapon. In a stunning revelation during Super Street Fighter 4, Ryu encounters Goken, who had miraculously survived his battle with Akuma. Goken used the power of nothingness to seal the Satsui no Hado within Ryu, rendering him unconscious. Akuma arrived, challenging Goken to a death duel over Ryu. The outcome of their epic battle remained unknown, but Ryu later appeared free from the Dark Hado, suggesting Goken had either won or the fight remained unresolved. Ryu and Ken eventually found Goken along a cliff. While Ken wanted Goken to stay, Ryu wished him well, ready to continue his own journey, forever pursuing the path of the true warrior. During this generation of fighting games, Street Fighter 4 would not be the only new fighter from Capcom, as they would also give to us the bizarre Tatsunoko vs Capcom, Marvel vs Capcom 3, and Tekken Cross Street Fighter, titles which of course also featured Ryu. However, as for the next canon chapter in Ryu's story, this would occur in Street Fighter 5 in 2016. Functioning as yet another sort of midquel, this title is set between the events of 4 and 3. Ryu is a central part of the game's cheesy cinematic story known as the Shadow Falls. Ryu seeks the wisdom of Dhalsim to gain control over the Satsui no Hado. After an intense sparring session, Dhalsim advises Ryu to face and conquer the Dark Power, rather than merely suppressing it. Their conversation is abruptly interrupted by Necalli, a fearsome deity-like entity intent on devouring the souls of the powerful fighters. In a fierce battle, Ryu is nearly overwhelmed and succumbs to his dark power, but Dhalsim intervenes, saving him just in time. Necalli retreats and Dhalsim reveals that Necalli is an ancient being that emerges during times of crisis to consume warrior souls. Ryu realizes the world is in grave danger. As the story unfolds, Ryu defies the odds, overcoming the Satsui no Hado and ultimately defeating Necalli. However, a greater threat looms. M. Bison's Black Moon super weapon, designed to seize global control. Ryu teams up with Ken, Chun-Li, and Karin to launch a daring assault on Shadaloo. Chun-Li defeats Fang and rescues Li Fen, while Ryu confronts M. Bison in an epic showdown. In a climactic battle, Ryu channels the power of nothingness, infusing his Hadouken with this pure energy to defeat his old rival M. Bison. As the Shadaloo base crumbles around them, Chun-Li falls behind, but Ryu uses his Hadouken to hold back the explosion's flames, ensuring their safe escape. After the intense confrontation, Ryu is found meditating, reflecting on his journey, when Ken arrives for a friendly sparring match to test Ryu's newfound resolve. Ryu triumphs over Ken, and during their bout, Ken knocks off Ryu's red headband. Picking it up, Ryu realizes he has truly discovered his inner strength. Ken, pleased with Ryu's growth, acknowledges the significance of the headband for future battles. They share a fist bump, celebrating their enduring friendship and Ryu's profound progress. Now, logically by this point, M. Bison has been defeated, Ryu has overcome the Dark Hado, so you would think his story has pretty much been finished, right? Well, wrong apparently, as he comes back in Street Fighter 6. The newest game in the Street Fighter timeline, which we shall get around to discussing later in this video. But first, we have a little more to talk about. Beyond the Shadow Falls, roster members in Street Fighter V would all have their own individual prologues, which tell us a little more about what Ryu went through during this era. In his prologue known as Finding True Strength, in a dream Ryu battles his evil self who claims that the power to kill will make him stronger. Ryu rejects this notion. During a sparring session, Ryu, consumed by the Satsui no Hado, attempts to strike Goken with a Hadouken, which explodes in a flash of light. Ryu awakens with Goken warning him that he was nearly consumed by the dark power. Ryu then heads to Brazil to meet Ken. Rashid and Azam find Ryu, with Rashid introducing himself as a travelling hero. Goken questions Rashid's visit, and Rashid expresses his desire to challenge Ryu to test his own strength. Initially hesitant due to his fear of the Satsui no Hado, Ryu is encouraged by Goken, reminding him that the answer lies in the heart of battle. Ryu spars with Rashid, winning the match. Rashid learns about himself from the fight, thanks Ryu, and leaves. Realizing he needs to better understand his power, Ryu decides to leave as well. Goken advises him to visit Ken, who is concerned about him. Ryu meets Ken in Brazil, informed by Goken about Ryu's struggles with the Satsui no Hado. Ken suggests a match to help. They fight, but Ryu remains worried about the dark power. Ken reassures Ryu that if he ever succumbs to it, he'll stop him. Ken advises Ryu to relax and keep fighting. Ryu later goes to China and is ambushed by a Shadaloo soldier. Nash intervenes, defeating the soldier. Expecting to see Ryu, Nash triggers a bit of Satsui no Hado in him and suggests a fight to understand its limits. Their match ends in a draw. Surprised by Ryu's power, Nash respects Ryu's decision to suppress it rather than give in. Ryu thanks Nash, who then leaves. Past the release of this game, Ryu would make other notable fighting game appearances in the controversial Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite and gain the pleasure of becoming part of a Super Smash Bros. Roster. This warrior sure gets around. In fact, he has made so many appearances across comic books, mobile games, and other titles that we would be here all day if we tried to cover everything he's ever done. But before we move on to Street Fighter 6, let's turn our attention to this man's dark side.
My name is Ryu, and the ultimate power has awakened within me.
To understand the rise of evil Ryu, we first have to refamiliarize ourselves with the rise of Akuma, a character who first appeared in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo as a hidden final boss. This cold and extremely powerful fighter's sole motivation in life is honing his fighting skills by battling and destroying strong foes. Akuma is the brother of Goken, the man who trained Ryu and Ken. However, when Akuma and Goken were younger, they were taught by a fighter named Gusetsu, who would teach them life-threatening martial arts techniques. This included the Shun Gokusatsu, a lethal technique that translates as instant murder. As the two brothers progressed with their training, disputes arose regarding the true nature of their fighting style and the path to mastery. Ultimately, Goken refused to accept the violent nature of Gusetsu's teachings and left to begin his own dojo. Akuma, on the other hand, embraced what is known as the Satsui no Hado, the principle of giving up any compassion held towards other human beings in a mission to become the most powerful fighter possible. Removing elements like compassion meant that Akuma could fully focus on his power, which soon developed into a lust for fighting to the death. This stage of Akuma's life culminated with him challenging his master Gusetsu and fighting him to the death to prove that he had surpassed him. Years passed and Akuma eventually challenged his brother Goken, using the Shun Gokusatsu technique on him. Akuma assumed it killed his sibling, and from a distance in the woods, Goken's trainee Ken saw the attack via a huge flash in the sky. Ken found his master on the floor, resulting in him confronting Akuma in the woods, only to be easily defeated as well. Moving along through time, Akuma lived to find strong opponents, search for glow for worthy challengers, eventually identifying Ryu and becoming obsessed with him in the process. Akuma knew he would never get the true deathmatch he craved against the fighter or get to face Ryu at his full potential unless he could get Ryu to give in to the Satsui no Hado too. The character Evil Ryu is the version of the fighter who has given in to his dark urges. In the Street Fighter universe, Evil Ryu first showed up in Street Fighter Alpha 2. During the game, Akuma states he is able to sense the Satsui no Hado lying dormant within Ryu. This alternative version of the Street Fighter star first appeared in this game as a simple palette swap of the traditional character, only this time wearing a black or dark purple gi like Akuma. He also now wears a black headband and his skin is a slightly darker tone. Now embracing the Satsui no Hado and giving up compassion, Evil Ryu is of course cold and conceited, carrying an obsession with fighting to prove he is the strongest. Ryu in this incarnation has a lust for absolute power and has completely given up on empathy or any form of respect for others, viewing the likes of love, family, justice and vengeance as ideas that only the weak think about. These attitudes translate into the way he fights, displaying a brutal, heartless fighting style. Evil Ryu's dangerous bloodlust means he is willing to seek out and murder strong opponents. In Alpha 2, Evil Ryu encounters Sakura, the young fighter who idolizes him. In this instance, he makes a direct threat to her, stating he will show her no mercy if she attempts to stand in his way. If Ryu defeats his rival Akuma in the game, the title states Ryu defeated Akuma with his blood-soaked fist, and then disappeared to whereabouts unknown. Did Ryu embrace the real Satsui no Hado, or did he succeed Akuma as the master of the fist? Only time will tell when we see him again. Will he reach his full potential as a martial artist? The Satsui no Hado that consumed Ryu would resurface in Street Fighter Alpha 3, where he would once again encounter Sagat, the man whose chest Ryu had previously ripped open at the first World Warrior tournament. This was the first sign that Ryu may have some darkness deep inside of him. In the Alpha series, Sagat hunts down Ryu, seeking revenge for this incident, wanting to beat him in combat. However, when Sagat discovers Ryu in this new dark form, he realizes something is extremely off. Sagat tells evil Ryu to take a look at himself, as he has lost control of his own power, and that he is no longer the same man he wanted to challenge. This just leads evil Ryu to mock Sagat, and tell him to shut up and fight. The two do battle with evil Ryu winning, but afterwards, evil Ryu realizes that Sagat held back in the match. After Ryu questions his opponent, Sagat pities him, stating he is not the man who left a scar on his chest, nor would a real warrior allow himself to be tempted by cheap tricks to gain power. Concluding with Sagat telling evil Ryu that he will wait for his true rival to return and then challenge him instead. Next, evil Ryu takes on Bison, with Bison being impressed with his powers, but not concerned by them. After all, Ryu is only human and he cannot control the evil energy within, and it will only be a matter of time before he plunges into darkness completely. In combat, evil Ryu easily dispatches of Bison. Next in the game, evil Ryu travels to Shin Akuma's location so that the two can test their powers against one another to see who the ultimate fighter really is. Akuma is pleased with his arrival, stating words do not have any meaning to us, and to satisfy his anger and rage, he should just attack him. In Alpha 3, defeating Shin Akuma as evil Ryu is left in a temporarily dazed state, in awe of the incredible power levels he has now reached. A flashback plays of him lusting over ripping Sagat's chest open previously, with the scene ending with Ryu claiming his fist is stained with blood of death, with the art showing his eyes becoming red and his chest expanding as he screams in sadistic pleasure. The end of evil Ryu's Alpha story closes by revealing to the player that Ryu's downfall is complete, and he has now taken on Akuma's burden of looking for a stronger opponent to defeat him. With the Street Fighter Alpha games being a story prequel to Street Fighter 2, and with evil Ryu in the Alpha series not being invented until after the release of most of the Street Fighter 2 iterations, evil Ryu's arc was obviously not part of most of the versions of Street Fighter 2. However, this would all change very recently in 2017 with the release of Ultra Street Fighter 2 The Final Challengers, a HD remake of the classic Street Fighter 2 game that adds yet another two fighters, Violent Ken, who we've covered in depth in the past on here, and of course evil Ryu. Playing as this character in the game, he enters the second World Warrior tournament, where he once again easily dispatches of Bison in combat. Bison is speechless as a result of the extreme power on display, making his psycho powers look like nothing in comparison. Evil Ryu does not care about Bison, and due to having no interest in dispatching those he considers weaklings who are not even on his level, he declares his power to destroy everything will continue to bring him to new heights. The title concludes with him going in search of Akuma, so that he can fight him to the death. Thus, evil Ryu's story conclusion in Alpha 3 does not actually match out of his role in Ultra Street Fighter 2, as Akuma appears to be alive and well. The next entry in the mainline Street Fighter games in terms of timeline would be Street Fighter 4. In this game, evil Ryu first shows up in the original edition of the game in a vision as part of Akuma's meditation. He becomes a playable character as of Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition, with his introduction showing him regaining consciousness in the middle of nowhere. Here he becomes completely engulfed by the Satsui no Hado, the source of his incredible powers. He then sets out to show his ultimate power to the world. To make his appearance more menacing in this game, his design was given an overhaul, making him look even more Akuma-like in the process. As of this game, he now has fangs and red eyes. In combat, his hair is spiked upwards with a reddish tint, and his clothes and headband are now torn. To top off the intimidation, he was also given a demonic voice to match his look, and emits a dark red aura in every match. The most notable change to his look of all, though, is a new gaping hole burned into the fighter's chest, with a similar scar appearing on his back too, featuring a glowing kanji symbol that reads as heaven. It is suspected that this feature relates to the Ryu final manga. Finishing a playthrough as evil Ryu ends with him attracting Shadaloo's attention. and Bison's grunts intercept him with firearms, but Ryu murders them before they even get an opportunity to react. The game ends with him declaring his Hado craves more blood and violence, something he claims nothing less than a fight to the death can quench. Sadly, Evil Ryu as a playable fighter would not be a part of Street Fighter 3 or Street Fighter 5. However, in the latter he does appear in one of Ryu's dreams in his regular form. The evil version of himself tries to convince his normal self about the power of destruction to kill, and it is for the destiny of his own fist. Ryu finally rejects his word, knowing that this is not his answer. This does result in a new problem for Ryu though, as by overcoming the Satsui no Hado dwelling deep inside him, it allows it to manifest into a demon. This sentient being takes the name Kage, who lives to prove that Ryu is nothing without him. Like the original Ryu before him, he too seeks to challenge both Akuma and Sagat, Ryu's own greatest rivals. We will dig more into Kage shortly, but first, let's cover where else Evil Ryu can be found. Evil Ryu would appear in crossovers and non-canon Street Fighter games, such as all 3 installments in the Street Fighter EX trilogy, which continue to see him looking for strong opponents. In SNK vs Capcom, the match of the millennium, Evil Ryu would be promoted to final boss status, a position worthy of such a powerful fighter. Prior to taking him on, players must defeat M. Bison and Fatal Fury's villain Geese Howard, with them referring to him as the Creature. They end up fleeing the scene when the capsule holding him explodes, leaving the player's team to deal with his insane powers. Evil Ryu would go on to be included in other Capcom vs SNK games, but would also play a role in the Marvel vs Capcom series, but sadly just functions as an alternative Ryu costume in these ones. The character would play a role in the Namco Cross Capcom RPG after Ryu becomes consumed by the Satsui no Hado, with his evil form remaining in the story until that arc closes. Evil Ryu would also show up in Asura's Wrath as the second and final opponent in some of the game's extra DLC. Evil Ryu retains all of his moves from Super Street Fighter 4, but they are significantly modified for the style of this game. In other forms of media, such as Street Fighter Alpha the animation, the Satsui no Hado overtakes Ryu several times, becoming Evil Ryu in the process. In the movie though, he does manage to overcome the Dark Forces. Evil Ryu would also play a role in Street Fighter Alpha Generations as a result of a transformation when Ryu fights Akuma. Evil Ryu tries to perform a Shungo Kusatsu on Akuma, only to be stopped by that flower we mentioned earlier, which results in Ryu managing to break the Satsui no Hado's influence over him. While Ryu and Evil Ryu are very much the same character, the best way to think of Evil Ryu, who is playable in the video games, is as a what-if version of the character, and how things would unfold if Ryu submitted to the Satsui no Hado. Even Kage, who appears in Street Fighter V, is technically not simply a manifestation of Evil Ryu either, but instead a physical manifestation of the Hado itself. All in all, the alternative dark path of Ryu is an interesting one, as are those times when he came so close to being overtaken by the dark side, only to resist temptation in the dire moments. I hope this info today has been able to make Evil Ryu's existence and purpose clearer to you, and that you can go away from this now with a better understanding of this destructive character. So now, let's move on to Kage. With the temptation of the Dark Hado no longer dwelling inside Ryu, one would think that his issues on this side of things would be resolved. However, after overcoming it in Street Fighter V, it would be revealed to us that Ryu still had a huge problem to deal with. Within Ryu's Street Fighter V character story, a scene takes place where we see him meditating in a dojo during a storm. As the storm gets progressively worse, Ryu's shadow on the wall begins to take a strange form, and a sinister voice begins to laugh. This moment is the first appearance of Kage, who is urging Ryu to give in to the Dark Hado once more, as without it, the Force claims Ryu is nothing. Essentially, while it was thought that the persona that was Evil Ryu had been vanquished for good, the Dark Hado from Ryu would instead manifest and develop sentience of its own, resulting in an entity completely separate from Ryu who calls itself Kage. But before we progress further and discuss this demonic entity in more detail, I want to thank each of you who have chosen to walk the path of darkness at home and subscribe to this channel. Your subscription means the world to me and helps videos like this reach larger audiences than ever before. Subscribe now and help me harness my dark power and become one of the most powerful forces on all of YouTube. So subscribe now. Yeah. Anyway, like evil Ryu before him, Kage is said to be extremely sadistic, taking pleasure in threatening all those he faces. Kage doesn't simply believe though that he is very powerful, he believes that he is the embodiment of power itself. Feeding on fear, Kage is as frightening a foe as they come. Observations indicate that it is likely that the Kage character was inspired by Japanese folklore, built around entities known as Onis. Onis are mostly known for their fierce and evil nature, manifested in their propensity for murder and cannibalism. Notwithstanding their evil reputation, Oni possess complex aspects that cannot be brushed away simply as evil. They are typically portrayed as hulking figures with one or more horns growing out of their heads. They are creatures which instill fear and feelings of danger due to their grotesque outward appearance, their wild and sometimes strange behaviour, and their powers. The emergence of Kage would not be the first time that Street Fighter's story would be inspired by such tales, as the Street Fighter 4 series would introduce a character known as Oni, who represents Akuma if the Dark Hado took him over completely. Kage embodies Ryu's darker half and draws parallels with inner demons. Inner demons are of course represented across a variety of cultures and are said to cause individuals to commit evils and wicked deeds. Basically, inner demons are the darker half of one's subconscious mind. In the game's story, Kage soon does battle with Sagat, a fighter who Ryu has a storied history with, stretching all the way back to the original Street Fighter game from 1987. Kage absolutely pummels the master of a Tiger Uppercut, with Sagat being extremely disappointed when he learns his old rival was not the one who was able to best him. This easy victory for Kage further backs up his belief that he is all-powerful, the strongest part in fact of what was formerly Ryu. Sagat though is not the individual that Kage is seeking out, but instead Akuma, which makes sense considering those with murderous intent in the Street Fighter universe want to face off with those who wield the same frightening power. Kage manifests behind Akuma, with Akuma mistaking Kage for Ryu before concluding it is no more than a soulless silhouette. Kage begins to taunt Akuma though, and the pair soon do battle. Throughout the contest, Kage taunts Akuma, but ultimately Akuma is able to make fairly easy work of this new foe. The reason Akuma claims victory was so easy was because he believes Kage can merely only think about strength and fighting, delivering one powerful punch making the demon disappear. Akuma then wonders to himself if Kage is the path Ryu has truly chosen. Building on why Akuma was able to overcome Kage, this is because although Kage fights existing in the form of darkness purged from Ryu, his extreme power leads him to fight without any boundaries or humanity to him whatsoever. This very factor though is his weakness, as he lacks the level of control of skilled practitioners like Akuma. While his battle with Akuma was over, of course though, Kage's Street Fighter V adventure would not be complete without a showdown with Ryu himself. Transitioning back to the scene where we first met this intimidating entity, Ryu tells Kage that he would not deny Kage's existence, but he cannot accept that they are one of the same. So therefore he wouldn't be fighting Kage back as the being tries to forcibly corrupt him. This then sees a battle take place atop Suzaku Castle, aka Ryu's iconic home stage. As for this fight, Ryu claims he isn't fighting to win or lose in this one. Kage then proceeds to beat Ryu up, further mocking him in the process. But Ryu merely dismisses all of this, informing Kage that he can do whatever he wants. Ryu tells it that if it wants to corrupt Ryu, it may, and if it wants to leave, it may. This leads to Kage becoming distraught and confused, asking Ryu why he isn't afraid. Not being able to feed off of Ryu's fear, Kage is not able to influence Ryu and make him his host. This not only leads to Kage becoming extremely fearful himself, but soon vanishing as a result. This incident proves that Ryu really has seemed to have managed to overcome the Dark Hado, with his dark side becoming truly a thing of the past. Which of course finally leads us on to Street Fighter 6. Released in 2023, Street Fighter 6 is not only the most recent game, but also the latest chapter in the Street Fighter timeline, preceding even the events of Street Fighter 3, which we have never seen past before this point. Ryu looks more muscular and bearded than ever before, and in this older form we got our first glimpse of him in the game's initial reveal trailer. The only problem though is if you have been following this long boy of a video up until this point, you probably noticed that it seems Ryu has finished his story and overcome all of the odds and literal demons that were holding him back. So what was next in store for this beloved character? Unsurprisingly, he would re-emerge in Street Fighter 6, continuing to strive for greatness on his seemingly endless quest for what he calls true strength. Ryu, known for his impeccable manners and genuine sincerity, continues to roam the world in search of formidable challengers. Having conquered the dark forces of the Satsui no Hado, he now aims to reach even greater heights, pushing his limits and honing his skills with every encounter. In the game's arcade mode, Ryu embarks on a thrilling journey, reflecting on his relentless quest for true strength. Memories of Ken, his great friend and rival, fuel his determination. He honours the virtuous fighters Guile, Chun-Li and Dhalsim, who stood by him during his darkest times. His thoughts then turn to his formidable adversaries, Sagat, Akuma, M. Bison and the dark side within himself, each a towering obstacle he has conquered. Now liberated from the Satsui no Hado, Ryu strives for even greater power. At the legendary Genbu Temple, a new challenger appears. Luke steps forward, eager to test his mettle against the legendary warrior. Ryu, intrigued, questions Luke's purpose. After a moment of contemplation, Luke reveals his burning desire to face stronger opponents. Seeing a reflection of his younger self in Luke's fiery spirit, Ryu accepts the challenge. The battle is intense, but Ryu emerges victorious. As he walks away, Luke snaps a photo of Ryu's back, a memento that captures the essence of Ryu's enduring legacy, and reminds him of his own journey ahead. The game's World Tour mode reveals that after an intense training journey abroad, Ryu triumphantly returned to Japan, heading straight to the legendary Genbu Temple. Welcomed by a priest, he dives into a vibrant energy of a festival, carrying a grand portable shrine. The excitement intensifies as formidable fighters like Luke and Lily arrive, eager to test their skills against him. Amidst this whirlwind, Ryu discovers Ken's predicament, but opts to respect his friend's choice to stay distant. Resolute, Ryu confides in the Avatar, revealing his decision to stay in Japan and continue his relentless pursuit of strength. It seems that in Street Fighter 6 it is Ken Master's story that has taken centrefold, thus meaning that Player 1 has finally taken a back seat to who has always been Player 2. However, why on earth not we consider Ryu has already achieved it all in the fighting game world? With nothing left to do, does this mean it's finally time for him to retire? I guess the answer is, no matter how complete his story may be, and no matter how little there is left for him to do, he will always be one of this franchise's most popular characters, and legions of fans will be forever gagging to play as him. Further to this, from a storyline perspective, Ryu is on a permanent, continuous journey of self-improvement. And with an athlete of this character, I don't personally believe there will ever be a day that he is satisfied, and believes he has discovered this so-called true strength. So is it time for Ryu to retire? Certainly not in our lifetime at least. Anyway, if you enjoyed this crazy long video, you might want to treat yourself to up to 90% off of thousands of great games using my affiliate link. Treat yourself, you get bargains and it supports my work too. One thing I'd like to add is that if you want to show your support in a more personal way and receive an end credit at the end of one of these uploads, then you might want to consider backing this channel over on Patreon. Now click on my movie length upload on Street Fighter's final bosses. Yeah. Cheerio.